This is a small Tetrapack plate that I have been working on recently, and you can tell, you can see the different textures and strokes that I added to it for depth, for dimension, for hopefully to capture more colors and more variations and perhaps unexpected textures with this print. And I am going to show you how I like to apply watercolor paint instead of ink on my Tetrapack plates. And I actually like to use liquid watercolor or watercolor in a tube. I will apply just a little bit. I don't necessarily have a preferred brand. I haven't tested different brands at this point. I don't know if there is a difference, but I would assume that different brands will work differently depending on how they are made. So I'm applying some watercolor. I'm definitely making a royal mess right here. This is the good mess, the mess that I do like to make. This one right here. So I'm going to spread the watercolor paint onto the plate with a little bit of foam book paper. There. So the thing about working with watercolor is that watercolor dries, but it dries quick actually. But I like that. I like sort of using that to my advantage. Yeah. And if I feel like I need a little bit more on those areas where I couldn't spread it far enough, I'm just going to add a little bit in here. And a little bit right there. And so we're going to push it in. We're going to push it in. Add some more right here. So you want to push it in as much as you can. And if you feel like you're short, then just add more paint to it, a little bit more. I want to make sure the watercolor paint goes into the creases just the same way you would push the ink in. The only difference is that watercolor is not as extendable maybe as the ink, because it doesn't have that grease that moves it and keeps it wet for long. So we want to push in the paint. This is going to be my base color, yeah? Then there you go. That's what it looks like so far. And if you have another piece while it's still wet, I will seek to wipe some of it off to remove the excess. It gets really tacky. And so you're going to try to remove as much excess as you can. Like I said, the watercolor does dry fast. So at some point it's going to stay there and you won't be able to remove any with a dry sheet. So it looks like that's about it. As much as I'm going to get off of it. But the next step for me in this process would be to use some wet Q-tips. And this is where the fun begins. I am going to wipe lightly those areas that I want to have lighter color. And I will alternate in between the dry tip and the wet tip. And I like to be gentle around the creases so that I don't remove too much paint from that area. Yeah. But with the wet Q-tip, you can get some lighter colors. Some light right there. Okay. So I will continue to lightly remove some of the excess watercolor paint in the specifically in the areas where I want to create some light colors. Yeah. You can see right there. And sometimes you get to move the watercolor as well, yeah? And you can create some tones or blend the tones. If my Q-tip feels saturated, then I will go ahead and get another one. And I like to remove the excess water if I put too much by rolling it on the towel that I have nearby. You can see that by adding some of the water to the Q-tip, I am removing the excess paint, but I'm also playing with that watercolor on those edges where there are more scratches. Just to play with the drawing a little bit more. You can see how it's coming along. Yeah. And that is If you remove a little bit more, you get to have a little bit more of a light contrast right here. And you get to play with the paint as well. Okay. And as you do this more often with practice, you will find that the Q-tip becomes a really valuable tool in the art making. And you get to play with it and create sometimes different effects depending on how your watercolor paint moves and depending on how it reacts to the water, and like I said, different brands may work differently depending on how the watercolor consistency is made. But for the most part, you are moving the watercolor as you are removing some of it to play with the light and shadow effects. You can see how the image is emerging now. So me removing some of it. So I decided that I didn't want it that dark on this area. So I am going to be wiping some more. Yeah. So when you're moving the watercolor, keep in mind that you don't want to remove too much on the areas where you want to retain that contrasting dark tone. You just want to take that into consideration.